Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Amcrott, the Executive Director of the Laura and Alvin Siegal Lifelong Learning Program at Case Western Reserve University. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program, really the first in our fall season, return to campus, as it were, for the Northeast Ohio Public Policy forums that we offer in conjunction with the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland, Northeast Ohio Media Group, with our additional sponsors, Lakewood and Cuyahoga County Library Systems, and our corporate sponsor, First Interstate Properties Limited. One programming note for those of you who are interested in learning more about our lifelong learning program, our catalogs are available in the lobby, and that's all I'll do in terms of a shameless plug. I do want to remind everyone that there are next upcoming forum is going to be Tuesday, September 17th at the Lakewood Public Library, 6:30 p.m. on women's health in Ohio. That will be moderated by Marlene Harris-Taylor of WCPN Idea Stream. And I do want to remind everyone that for questions tonight, please take a note card. If you didn't pick one up on your way in, keep your hand up, someone will bring it to you. So once you write a question on a card, please hold the card up and someone will collect it from you. And also remind everyone that we want to give our panelists the opportunity to talk. So we want this to really be a civil forum. If you have something to say, please reserve it for the note card. And with that, we will get started. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, and he will introduce our panelists. We are pleased that Rich Exner will be moderating this evening's program. He has been and will be covering the 2020 U.S. Census in depth. Currently as Cleveland.com's data analysis editor, Rich focuses on data journalism, providing unique analysis on news, business, and sports topics, and creating interactive online presentations for this research. Before joining Cleveland.com, Rich was a reporter and editor of the Cleveland Plain Dealer and ran UPI's Cleveland Bureau. He is a journalism graduate of The Ohio State University, an adjunct instructor of journalism at Cleveland State University, and classroom speaker and seminar instructor on data journalism. Please join me in welcoming Rich Exner.
Thank you. Just to let you know the format, I'll take time to introduce our experts tonight, and we'll get some questions, let them carry the conversation, and then let everybody else interact with questions as we move along. Take notes to make sure I have this right on our speakers tonight. We're fortunate to have some. I'm a data geek, and I've been through the census a few times, but these people really dig a lot deeper into it, so they can get into the questions in a little bit more than I would. So it's great to have them here tonight. It's difficult for me to say this because I'm from the Ohio State University. But when it comes to census stuff, there's the Population Studies Center at the University of Michigan. It's like the go-to place. And tonight we have Lisa Neidert from there. Now she's a retiree of the Population Studies Center, but still is involved in all things census related. She teaches a course at the University of Michigan on Federal Statistical System called Politics and Data, and will be teaching a course on the 2020 census this winter. She's also on the City of Ann Arbor's Complete Count Committee to make sure that everybody's counted on the census, as well as the county-wide committee. So that's Lisa. And then we also have, moving close to home, Daniel Ortiz in the middle. Daniel's the Outreach Director for Policy Matters Ohio. He's a native of Lorain, a graduate of Oberlin College. He brings 14 years of experience in organizing campaign strategies, education. Before his work with Policy Matters, Daniel worked at the local, state, national level for campaigns, managing partnerships across the Midwest and South. Census data and a lot of what he does is core to his work. And finally, from Cuyahoga County Government, we have Michele Pomerantz, Director of the Regional Collaboration of Cuyahoga County. She started out as a Cleveland school teacher, then ended up working for the National Federation of American Federation of Teachers as a deputy director to the president there. Now she's with Cuyahoga County. She works with the city and village stakeholders for things of importance countywide. And one of her responsibilities now is a special project with the 2020 census, and she'll be telling us, as you can see from her map, a little bit about targeted efforts to make sure people are counted in targeted places. So we won't waste much time to get going and getting into it, but first just a quick pieces of trivia about the census. A lot of people think it starts in April, but the census geeks know it really starts in January in Alaska, because in Alaska, people live in very remote areas, and they might go fishing or hunting come April and won't be found. And some of the places are actually easier to get to on sleds in the winter. So the census actually starts in January, although for most of us it starts in April. This is the 24th census. It's been taken, we've got twice as many presidents as we've had census, so it's a rare thing to have the census. But it's happened every 10 years, even through wars or everything. Since the first census in 1790, it's never been missed. But this is the first census in which the people going out in the field, for those that don't return their forms to check on them, their tool is not going to be a paper and pen. It's an iPhone 8. So that's new in the 2020 census, the first iPhone census, because up until 1880, they actually did a hand count. Those tally marks we did when we were kids with 4 dashes in the line. And then in 1890, they got into doing those key cards to start doing things. So it's really come along on that. Is the census accurate? As accurate as they can make it, right? But famous study from after the, after the World War II, found that there were 13% more blacks registered for the military than the census had existed in the country. So, as accurate as it is, there's always efforts, and that's what some of the discussion will be tonight, to talk about how accurate it can get. Children is a group that's was said to be undercounted last time for a number of reasons. Maybe confusion whether the grandparent, if that's where they stayed, counted them, or maybe people's confusion about, well, if they were born before or after April. And then there won't be a citizenship question, as the Supreme Court's ruled on that, but the Census Bureau is talking about reporting citizens and non-citizens when they report to President Trump at the end of December in 2020 on the results. And also tonight, if you have follow-ups, we have a couple representatives from the Census Bureau came out from Philadelphia for our forum tonight, and maybe they'll be able to interject as we move along. So maybe I'll just give each of you an opportunity to say what's on your mind to get us going here tonight. You want to start, Michele?
Sure. I also would like to give a chance to introduce my County Executive Armond Budish also, but I'm happy to be part of the Cuyahoga County Complete Count Committee, and we have 2 co-chairs, including Jerry Sue Thornton from Tri-C, as well as the County Executive. Cuyahoga County is looking to make sure that each person in the county is counted, and wanted a fun fact, it's $1,814 for each person not counted that Cuyahoga County and the state of Ohio loses. So I want to just start out by saying welcome to be here.
And I forgot that we have the County Executive Armond Budish here. Did you want to say a couple words before we got started?
Sure.
I never met a politician that didn't want to say a few words. But I should say an executive, not a politician.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Hello, everybody. So it's really a pleasure to be here for this important event, and I know how important it is because actually my wife Amy came out tonight instead of staying home watching the debate of the Democratic candidates. So I can tell it's important, and it's a pleasure to be here with the panelists. You got great panelists here, and Rich Exner, who's going to be your moderator. I think of Rich as the numbers guy. He counts everything for the Cleveland.com and Plain Dealer, so I know he's the right person to chair this event. As Michele mentioned, I am one of the 2 co-chairs of the Complete Count Campaign Committee, along with Dr. Jerry Sue Thornton. The county has been putting a lot of resources into this effort because it is so important. We need everybody to be counted. So much of the things we do depend on a complete census. We provide Medicaid, we provide SNAP, we provide Head Start, we provide foster care, and the resources that come through those programs to people who need it depends on the census, depends on the count. So it's critically important that we make sure everybody gets counted. We're particularly focused on the hard to count populations, and I think the panel is going to talk more about that. But there are people who are not counted every year, and it hurts Cuyahoga County. And this year, as Rich mentioned, we had this controversy over the immigration question, And I'm concerned that that controversy alone, even though it was resolved, is going to scare people away when we go up to them and ask the questions that need to be asked to count them in the census. So it makes it our job even more difficult and more important. We have many of our county staff involved in this effort that are working on this, and Michele is leading the effort for the county, and that's critically important. Couple things, if you would like to get involved, we need you. Please do that. You can talk to Michele afterwards, and she will make sure you get called and contacted and involved. Also, we have a website, our county website for the count, cuyahogacounty.us/2020 census, and you can get materials there at the website. You can get more information about the census and what we need. Just click on the resources button at the top of the page. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you learn a lot tonight. Thank you. Thanks, Rich.
Armond can count too. We've never talked about this, but I did a lot of stories on gerrymandering in the last couple of years, and I found the quotes from 9 years ago. You'll remember this. I found quotes from him saying when he was upset about the maps that they came up with, that this was going to guarantee, I think it said 2/3 Republicans and 1/3 Democrats, no matter the vote in the State House. And the math has worked out exactly as the quotes in the archives say you said it would.
Yeah, well, we can count. So thank you, Rich.
Now, Policy Matters Ohio, if you aren't familiar, does a lot of research and advocacy work, and Daniel will be no doubt involved with the results of the census and perhaps even with the census itself. So any thoughts you have just going into the census 2020?
Thank you, Rich. I think, one, I'd just like to also thank the county for their role in really convening the complete count committee that I'm actually a part of, and I'm one of the co-chairs for the subcommittee on hard-to-count communities. So,
Recruited him early.
but I would say, I think, it's been said in pointing to the citizenship question, I think that's something that casts a large shadow. And I think that when we look at the 2020 census, we have to realize that while we talk about enumeration and technical processes, and there's a lot of things, it's a very big and complicated process, it's something that while we try to make it very clear and technical and work on the best process, it's something that's always been political. I think when we look at who counts in this country and how they're counted, that's something since 1790. We have to understand that there's a history of people not being fully counted. We have to look at, the fact that Black Americans in this country weren't fully counted until after slavery. We have to understand that Native Americans in this country weren't counted until 1870. That Hispanic and Latinx individuals were first counted in 1930 and then not counted again, and that was counted as Mexican, and then counted again with the term Hispanic in 1970. So when we look at this history and we look at the moment that we're in, it's important to take that context and know that as we head into 2020, we have a lot of challenges. But I do think that when we come together, when we work together in thoughtful ways, we can accomplish great things. I was actually at a great convening from folks at Cleveland Votes earlier today, some familiar faces in the room, and I think we're looking at how do we do the outreach to hard-to-count populations? How do we really take all the resources that the census is providing and understanding the challenges that may be internal, that we have to work through, and know that our complete count committees are going to be more pivotal than ever before in a census that's got a lot of new technical processes. When we start talking about people being counted and having the opportunity to self-report online for the first time, that is great. But also for anyone here who's been was involved with the rollout of the ACA and healthcare, technical systems can provide challenges, even in the best of scenarios. So we have to be prepared and we have to be agile. And again, we have to continue to come together to make sure that we're sharing out a clear message, but also knowing that it's a very big and complex issue. So.
How about Lisa? What's on your mind as we get close?
Okay, I'm going to go backwards. The 2010 census, Ohio folks might say it was a disastrous census because you lost 2 congressional seats. And only one other state did that, that was New York. But that wasn't because of a bad census, it was because of your slow population growth. The Census Bureau would say that Ohio actually had a good census by process measures. You had a higher than average mail return rate. You had a higher than average, or a better than average net undercount. And a measure that gets a little bit more at who's missed, the omissions rate for Ohio was the third best in the nation. But Ohio's not, or Cuyahoga County is not Ohio. So, the problems for a city is going to be different than other parts of the state. So you in this audience or the people on this panel know who the hard to count communities are. Children, they're one of the harder communities to count. Young men, particularly African American young men. The Census Bureau, it was in 1940 that they first discovered, oh my God, we've got an undercount issue. And they've been trying to not just lower it, but get rid of the differential undercount, because some groups are counted worse than others. Anyway, but 2020 is also not 2010, and there have been references to what are the issues. We've got some new processes, but we've got this shadow going over the 2020 census. You can tell people that their data is not shared with ICE, but Motel 6 was sharing data with ICE. We just had a raid in Mississippi, and I can guarantee you there'll be another. The Census Bureau always asks the equivalent of ICE in previous histories, please don't do raids, and that agency will always say, we've got to keep doing our jobs. But there will be a raid in January. I can guarantee it. And what can you do to convince people? And I'm going to say, go ahead and answer it so no one will knock on your door. You'd rather answer it at the library or at home rather than have somebody come knocking on your door. But I'm not the person that is going to be trusted in that community as much as I'm going to help. I'm going to talk to students. I'm going to talk to my neighborhood, etc. So I'll stop at that point and interject other things when we get questions or Rich asks questions.
So the way it works, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that next time everybody's not going to get a form. Most people, 80% of the country approximately, will get a notice in the mail saying go online or make a telephone call to complete the census. The places where they suspect the internet usage isn't as high or where there's older populations will get the form from the get-go. And then if you don't respond to 2 or 3 cards, about a month later you will get the form if you didn't go online to do it.
Which is sort of hurts because all the initial advertising is like, do the census. And as you're waiting for that questionnaire to come and then it comes in the mail, by that time, maybe you kind of ignore it. I actually got the trifecta of being I was an ACS, the American Community Survey came to I had this official from the Census Bureau, and it was this little piece of paper that had a secret code for me, some random bunch of letters, and I filled it out online, and so that was kind of fun.
So if you don't respond enough times, eventually somebody will theoretically come knock on your door
Yeah.
and see if you're there. If you're not there, they might check with your neighbors. Hey, does anybody live in that house? That type of thing. And then the Census Bureau tells us they'll match up. If that fails, to records, like are there any other government records they have to know that people live there or not? So with all those things in place to count people, even if they don't respond, I mean, could you illustrate some of your concerns?
As I illustrate some of the concerns, I want to make sure that, as you had mentioned, the census does not start in January. It started for our team last February, when the county executive determined staff that would be allocated to get prepared for the 2020 census. So want to make sure that the campaign that we're putting in place, much like an organizing campaign, much like a getting out the vote campaign, while it is political, this is a non-partisan issue. our ability to work with our planning commission, and Kevin Leeson is also here from the county, from our county planning commission, to put together maps, to put together a complete count committee that represents those trusted individuals so that people in different communities have the ability from their own peers and their own outreach and networking to be able to feel a little more comfortable and safe in giving their information, or understanding that even though it has never been done online before, with all of the scams and all the online securities, that this is coming, that we've been putting together things starting in last January, February, March, April, May, to get the word out so that even when the president decides to create havoc about whether or not the citizenship question, that those trusted individuals in your county and in your neighborhoods, whether it's a faith-based committee, the pre-K committee, the college education committee, the hospitals, the hard-to-count committees, are put together with those individuals who already have the relationships, so that this continues to be an outpouring of a message of the census is safe to take, and that it's an opportunity for you to be counted, and understanding that the risks involved of not having a complete count go for further gerrymandering, deeper elections that will disenfranchise those people who are most vulnerable, that must be counted, and make sure that they feel comfortable.
So
with
if it's done
counting.
all across the country, it may or may not affect how many U.S. House of Representatives members Ohio has, if it happens everywhere, but it would affect the representation in a certain area. If an urban area, for say, is
Right.
more undercounted than the rural area of Ohio. So
Right.
you have that map over
Yep.
there, and I take it the dark areas must be where you suspect there's going to be, or could be undercounting problems. What type of factors led to those areas? Is it the internet, or is it history of the last census? What?
I think a lot of it has to do, and again, I think it's great that both Daniel and I have this organizing background, but then Lisa and I both have this education background. And a lot of the things that are the same reasons in terms of urban education come into play a lot with the census. You have families that move a lot, and you have classrooms that start in August with 25 kids, and by that June, you'll have 25 kids again, but there'll be all new children. And so the migrating patterns and the idea of poverty comes into play, the idea of English as a second language comes into play, and also the idea of that trusted resource and established ability to have the same address all the time. I mean, it's a lot of it is connected to poverty. A lot of it is connected to even some of the storms that have occurred in Puerto Rico and in other parts of the country. The idea of the immigration patterns that are going through Northeast Ohio continue to show up in some of these areas of not getting an opportunity to have that undercount. Internet does play into it, but there's, I think, a lot of other factors as well. And also some of the tricks of knowing where to take to be counted. As, for an example, if you're a student at Kent State, but you live in, Brooklyn, where to be counted. I know you had mentioned a little earlier about if you're a 4-year-old child and you don't really have your registration at school, are you supposed to be counted there? One of the big myths that I was surprised to know is that even if you are incarcerated, if you're incarcerated at the Marion County jail, you are counted as a citizen of Marion County, which gives rural areas a little bit of a bigger census pull. But then actually when you're released from prison, you're dropped off back in Cleveland, Ohio. So you may be counted in Marion County, but you're not represented in that same factor. So I think getting that information out and understanding that distrust to begin with all put into play, which is why the county has put so much efforts into not competing with the city of Cleveland, who has their own complete count, but to have an organized approach to ensuring that the complete count committee is in places, not limited to those areas impacted in blue and green, but having a weekly organized way.
So the best way is to get counted, but if you don't get counted, you're leaving it up to the census to count you.
Yes.
What, historically, Lisa, can you address whether the Census Bureau, is it non-political when it gets into having to make these scientific decisions of the
Yes.
number of people there?
The Census Bureau is headed by a political, or not Census Bureau, but the Commerce Department has a, actually, and the director of the Census Bureau, both of those, particularly the Commerce, can be a political appointee. The Census Bureau director, to keep it from being political, they're supposed to be appointed in a year that ends in a 7, and their term goes to a year that ends in 2, so that you have time to familiar yourself, and then you could be under 2 different presidents. But no Census Bureau director in recent history has been there for more than, has even made their 5-year term. But the Census Bureau apparatus and how things are done are these career Census Bureau employees. They've worked there for 20, 30 years under different administrations, and the planning for the census could be done under a Republican administration, and then here's the census taken under a Democrat. It's not supposed to matter. Now, sometimes it does for budgets, other things that end up affecting, and something like throwing, all the career Census Bureau staff said it's gonna hurt the response rate if we collect data on citizenship. And so they weren't necessarily listened to, but I think that this hard to count map is made completely using data from the American Community Surveys, interactive, so you can click on each, not this because it's a piece of paper, but you click on it and go, oh, my census tract is hard to count because there's a lot of people over 80 in it, or that there's a lot of renters. And that's, you know, on average, renters are harder to count, but I don't know that would always be the case. You can sort census tracts by which one has the highest poverty rate, and they probably have some other characteristics with them. But it's not, the Census Bureau is not a political agency. Same with our jobs numbers. Those are done every single month by career employees, and they're not saying, well, let's make it look bad for Trump. Nope. They,
We got a couple of questions from the audience. One person says, I'm 70 in my 70s and puzzled that I've never completed a census form. Granted, I've moved many times across 4 states. Now, what the Census Bureau will tell you is it's so easy to fill out the census form, you might not remember doing it. I don't know if that's the case with whoever asked this question, but it is just 9 questions now. And it is just 1 person per household, so everybody in the household doesn't do it. It's just one census form per household. Where they can get an overcounts is if you counted your son or daughter away at college, and they're supposed to be counted where they're living at that time. But the census tries to do what they can to try to minimize that, but we do know there's overcounts there. Another question was for Daniel. Audience member wants you to elaborate on specific efforts for the count in the Hispanic populations. With all the talk, now we don't have that question here, and most of the Hispanics in Greater Cleveland are American citizens as opposed to other parts of the country, but specifically, is there a different Hispanic outreach? I know voting statistics say typically the Hispanic population is among the lowest to vote in elections.
Yes. No, thank you for that question. I think there are specific efforts, nationally. The National Alliance of Latino Elected Officials, NALEO, has been a part of various national coalitions around the census. In the state, at the state level, the Ohio Census Advocacy Coalition has also been up and running, and we've had representation from the Hispanic and Latinx community, and locally. We are convening and thinking through, what are the unique challenges. In particular, we're looking at this regionally. I think we're looking not just for Cuyahoga County, but also in conversation with Lorain and Lake County, where we know that there are different challenges. But I think it's about having a clear message to really hit a lot of the different concerns that folks have. Making sure that they know that they're going to receive that message also with trusted folks in the community that are going to be able to carry that, and to also be there to answer follow-up questions. I think that's something that we're still continuing to fine-tune, because we know that it's something that we're going to have a very short ramp to get people's attention, and to make sure that they're actually provided them the opportunity to fill out the census.
I'm not the person that would normally answer that question, but for the 2010 census, we had a complete count on the UMich campus, and we had a Nicaraguan guy that was on this little contest that we were running, and he was teaching English as a second language at a Methodist church in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And at that time, there was a census outreach worker that was assigned to our county, And he had him come and talk to the people saying, hey, it's safe to do. So Danilo spoke Spanish. This other guy didn't, but he was young and hip and seemed like a safe
Like
guy. He didn't have on a tie and
Yeah.
all that. And so so having two different people speaking to that group worked out pretty well. Now, the Census Bureau is going to have these outreach specialists in 2020, but just hot off the press, I saw a presentation today for the Scientific Advisory Committee, and they're behind. They were supposed to have their 1,500 hired in June, and they're...
In Cuyahoga County specifically, we were looking for 6,000 employees. And
Yeah.
these are $18.75
Yeah.
an hour jobs. And, you know, trying to make sure, we just found out, correct me if I'm wrong, Nada, if you are receiving TANF or food stamps or general assistance, you can be a census worker and still maintain those benefits. And so our Health and Human Services is doing a job fair and trying to target as many people in those neighborhoods receiving those benefits to be those census workers and try to organize them in a way so that a lot of this really does come up with organizing. It's education, it's communication, and it's organizing. It's using the tools that are already in place, open houses at every one of our schools, especially with Hispanic outreach in general. One of the most trusted people in a child's life or in a parent's life is their teacher, and utilizing and understanding that it's not just the responsibility of the census takers to make sure everyone is counted. It's everybody's responsibility in in a neighborhood to make sure, if you're at the county or at the city, if you are a leader in any organization, to make sure that you are also getting this message out in the best way possible because of so much being at risk.
And one thing I would be remiss if I didn't add is that, especially as we head into Hispanic Latino Heritage Month, we have a number of community events that we're... Convención Hispana is, you know, one in specific where we have a special surprise that we'll be debuting with, in partnership with the Cleveland Public Library, of a puppet show that's been adapted from a bilingual children's book, that we're going to be singing and dancing and talking about the census, in particular with that 0 to 5 population in mind, because we know that our kids are often the most undercounted of all. So there's lots of efforts, and we're trying to just continue to maintain that drumbeat in our community.
Yep.
I mean, to illustrate the size of the effort, it's a good thing for the jobs numbers every 10 years, because there are enough people hired, it actually moves the unemployment rates and the job numbers.
Right.
Right, it's 500,000, and the issue, though, this is a challenge that we didn't have 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the economy was kind of not good, so it was really easy for the Census Bureau to get not just hires, but quality hires.
Right.
In 1999, just before the dot-com bust, the unemployment rate was in the low 4s, maybe 4 or 5. They really struggled, and we right now have unemployment under 4%. So it's going to be hard to hire people this time around. Now, all you retirees, you're not unemployed, so you can actually just re-enter the labor force. But that's a challenge that is, it's a crapshoot on whether the unemployment rate is good or bad, because a high unemployment rate makes it easier for the Census Bureau to hire people. But
We've got a number of questions, I think, because Daniel was speaking about the languages on the census form. Might defer to our census people here, but I think what it is, that certain targeted areas you'll send based on history to like a Hispanic form. Was it like 12 languages or something, but more available online? How's that work?
Yeah, so online, folks can respond in 12 languages plus English, and by phone, 59 languages plus English.
So what she said, she's off the mic, and I'm getting signals from the camera here. But
turn around at least.
here, I'll let you repeat that because some of the people in the back.
Yeah, sorry.
About the language.
Yeah, so online, folks can respond in 12 languages plus English. And by phone, there's also 12 languages plus English, but there's additional guidance available for 59 additional languages. There's also guidance available for TTY and Braille as well, so.
Also, Cuyahoga County Library is partnering along with the Cleveland Library to make sure that there are centers where internet is available to be counted, that they're recruiting people for jobs as well. So making sure that every one of our libraries, systems, our hospitals, our places where people are frequenting, especially in those hard-to-count communities, have access and communication around the importance of this. It kind of reminds me a little bit. I'm old. The bicentennial, 1976, where like everyone was talking about it, and everybody's clothes were, I wore Garanimals. My mother dressed me in, and I had the red, white, and blue bicentennial pants, and we're really trying to saturate this. And one thing that I know this is a nonpartisan issue, but the state of Ohio, while they did create a complete count committee, they did not add any money to the state budget to support the census. And there were a lot of things I really loved about Governor DeWine's budget, including some things that we received for Cuyahoga County. But to not fully fund the census, especially when the $1,814 that we lose out as Ohioans, not just Cuyahoga County citizens, really, I think, you when you put your money where your mouth is and what you value, you put money toward, which is why we're kind of behind.
So there's no money in the state budget for the
There was
census?
no additional funding in the state budget, even though the ask was there over and over again, and we were working to get more funding
And in
to help create
comparison,
and
this
support.
would be an extreme example because of the hard-to-reach population, but in California, I believe there's somewhere north of $150 million in their state budget,
Not
in addition
Yeah.
to whatever they're doing at the local level.
So if Ohio were to put in, and I know Michael Barron has brought this up time and time again, if the state of Ohio was to put extra funding into the census, even for just promotional materials, it would go a long way, but we have not seen that funding, and we were pretty surprised about that.
How about the rest of you? Are you satisfied with the budget that the Census Bureau has been provided to do their job this time?
I mean, it's been late, and I think I'm not a real budget person, but I think they're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I would say it hasn't been. It's kind of like it doesn't help if it comes on December 30th. It's like it's too late.
Well, and I would just add to that, I've watched some of the committee hearings in Congress, and members of Congress were asking census officials that they needed more money, and I don't think, they even noted that that's something they typically don't do. But I think getting even back to the numbers that Michele brought up, the $1,814 per capita, that's something that I've looked at an update on that study, and I mean, that's based off of $21 billion for the state of Ohio. The most recent update is that the state of Ohio, including a more comprehensive view of different federal programs, it's $33.5 billion annually. So, I mean, that per capita dollar amount goes up to, north of $2,200. I think, again, looking at the impact that those dollars have and what we're putting in right now in funds, I'm not satisfied.
Well, and even, something as simple as roads and bridges, something we all use as Ohioans, regardless if you're in a urban or rural area, special education, those are things that impact every Ohioan and would be benefited by. We have been lucky at the county to have an executive that has helped us determine how important this is to dedicate so much staff as well as messaging and printing and things that way. But we've also been able to rely on the Cleveland Foundation and Gunn Foundation for philanthropic efforts to give us some funding so that we can print out copies of materials, which I printed out, for you. It's ridiculous to think that we have to print our own materials off in order for us to be counted when this should be something that should be done for us. That said, the people that we have encountered and worked with at the U.S. Census, including Stephen Shope, including Nada, who is here, have been wonderful, and they work very hard. But and we will continue, regardless of whether it's fully funded or not, to put all our efforts forward because of the so much is at risk, and because, quite frankly, as a white woman in her 50s, it's easier for me to be a champion of the census and to try to build trust around it than it is for some other disenfranchised groups. So where there's lack of funds, we create opportunities and passion, and hopefully getting that excitement about the citizenship and the importance of this.
I've got one more comment of sort of an example of a lack of funding. The Census Bureau, this is pretty much anyone would do this sort of rollout. They're supposed to have tests, you know, let's try, so there was a Rhode Island test. Providence, Rhode Island was the test, and it represents like Cleveland. There were supposed to be tests in 2 other sites in the United States. Well, not enough funds. And those other sites were not cities. One would be a rural area with low internet penetration, another area with maybe a Native American reservation or something. You know, they wanted to have 3 different types of communities. Rhode Island was the only community that got the full test. Happened to be when the census citizenship question was going on, and the test didn't even include the citizenship question. Now it didn't matter because it didn't end up happening, but here you're going to roll out and having a citizenship question without even testing it. But anyway, so the Census Bureau has not been able to do all the normal when you're rolling out a car and you got to make sure it rides in snow and ice and rain, and they only checked the rain part. They didn't get to check the high temperature area, you know, and stuff. So that hurts, and it might, but they are doing lots and lots of things. They've had, you know, some emergency testing. What happens if we have a fire in Jeffersonville, Indiana, which is where they process all the stuff? And so they've had some tests, but they haven't gotten to do as good a job as they'd like to do because of budgets.
So the way it kind of starts out is that they need to find out, I mentioned it's all households, it's not people that fill out these forms. So there's all this work been going on for some time to confirm where households exist. They have the Census Bureau hired people to go and confirm and count apartments and everything. And then afterwards, when you do the count, you've got people scrutinizing it too. Are you involved with, to what extent is the county or is it the individual cities involved on the addresses? And do you get to compare the addresses that the census has to what you have before the actual forms go out?
So the Planning Commission, I think Kevin had to step out, but our Planning Commission has been working with the Census Bureau to add in a lot of new development and different addresses and kind of cross-check. Census work does not end after the census is taken. The analysis and the double checking and triple checking with the data and again in the appeals process around certain data continues way into the summer. At this point, we're in the stage of education and communication, but also double checking addresses. So the County Planning Commission, which is an independent but cooperative group within Cuyahoga County, is working on that.
Yeah, it's nationwide, and some cities like New York City really, really good at it. They would be able to know, this is in the old days, there's 2 phone lines going in, so they'd go, okay, that they've got, this is a 2-family household and stuff. Now we have cell phones, so they can't use phone records, but some cities are really good at that, and other cities
And GIS
aren't.
helps. I think the GIS systems are and the idea, the Google mapping and things, I think is helpful. It doesn't completely do everything, but our mayors and managers associations, each mayor in a hard-to-count community has one person that is the responsible, and we provide copies of these maps so that you can drill down street by street, corner by corner, and house by house.
And the Census Bureau went that way a little bit more. They used to do a lot more people walking the streets, and they definitely, to cut costs, said let's try and do some of this electronically, which is not a bad
No, I think,
swap.
and I think that, I mean, the cost-saving measures are very real, and I commend them in that process. Also, just earlier today, during the Census Scientific Advisory Committee's hearing, they were describing the process of salting and scrubbing, of adding in false data and taking out households to make sure that they're actually, for those who are going out and checking, doing the work to make sure that they're verifying. So I think it's a very robust process.
Yep.
And despite the concerns about the budget, there are, like everything else, some efficiencies here. The idea that you electronically on a phone now
Right.
to send the information back, as opposed to somebody writing it down on a piece of paper like they did in 2010 and take it back. And in more remote areas, not so much in the urban areas, I don't think, but say in Alaska or Montana or Hawaii, I think they're using satellite imagery to identify where houses are and dwellings are.
Right, right.
So there are efficiencies built in, despite
Yeah.
the concerns,
The
so.
big advantage of the electronic thing, which they were gonna do in 2010, but it was, instead, tablets didn't exist. So Lockheed or some big company was gonna build a, what's the thing that first came out? The tablets. They were gonna build one, and, you know, it was behind schedule, over budget, so they just said, we're gonna go back to using paper and pencil. But the worst thing about paper and pencil is you don't know you've collected data on that household until it gets mailed back.
Right.
Whereas this, the second I click off that I've hit 1909 Barwood Street, they're not gonna send a census temporary employee to 1909 Barwood Street because they know it's been collected. So that's the best thing about electronic. The second it's been done, it's off the list.
So kind of a two-parter, maybe one person can take one part and one another. It seems like the one is you need to find the people for them to fill it out. And the other reason is some people might not want to fill it out for fear. So can somebody, you touched on it a little bit earlier, Lisa, touch on the privacy. I know it's fun for me. I'll race to used to be the Western Reserve Historical Society, now the internet. 74 years, I think it is. After each census, you can get the actual form so I can see how my parents and grandparents filled out the form, what their jobs were and everything. But that's not, under privacy laws, you have to wait that long for that.
72 years.
It was, how many?
72 years.
72.
Wow.
So I've got them from 1910, 1920, 1930, and 1940 with my family. It's kind of neat.
That's nice.
But nobody should see those before then. Nobody, even in another part of the government. Could somebody speak to whether that's really been the case, or there's some assurance so people are comfortable filling out census? And then the other one about reaching people, what about the homeless people? How to just maybe explain to people how that works?
There's a day or two, correct me
Yeah.
if I'm wrong. We have our Director of Homeless Services, Ruth Gillette, who's, again, finding somebody that already does the work so that they already have the relationships. There is, I think, a certain day where all homeless people will be counted, and they try to provide as much outreach as possible
Is that in
ahead
April
of time.
too?
I think it might be in May.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's after
Yeah.
the general census, that it's not a pop-in visit, that it's well planned out, and that those people who are working with homeless population understand it ahead of time and kind of try to remind. And again, I think it is convincing not only that it's a privacy issue, especially for people like homeless who may want to have their, be very private, that the expense of not being counted in many families is a bigger risk between the overall efforts than maintaining your privacy. So I think that it goes back to understanding that whether you're in the homeless and you're counted on, May 15th, or you're somebody who really does not want people at your house, or you're worried about a scam, that understanding that the risks of not being counted are, and the overall community concern can sometimes be even more important than the individual privacy concern. And trying to understand that while you can't mandate it, it is something that, understanding that is your, as an American citizen, it is your duty, and as somebody that lives in a society that needs roads and bridges and all the other things that are reliant upon the census, that putting that into perspective.
Well, it actually comes with a thing on the little form that you get, or the envelope does say it's mandatory. And the
But
census,
it is not a
jailable
No.
offense. But they
Right.
and they have tried.
and I don't think leading by fear is all.
No, no,
ever a
it's
good
it's
idea.
definitely not. But they have experimented with, let's leave out that mandatory language. They do these A/B tests, and so you get the mandatory language and you don't. And lo and behold, if you don't get the mandatory language, you go, It's just like Reader's Digest sending me one of those
Right.
things. But again, these are temporary employees, so they're going to be trained. When somebody comes at you with a gun saying, "Get off my lot," you get off the lot. You're not, it's not your duty to get killed, get shot at, have a dog come after you. Then again in 2010, they would go knock on the door. They could tell the house is occupied, but no one's ever there. So you all might be retired and are home. So they'll say, do you know anything about the neighbor? And you go, yeah, it's a guy, he's about 45. So they can get information from a neighbor, or they'll at some point use hot deck imputation. And so my neighborhood, they might have more people living in my house than live in my house, because there's families in my neighborhood, and don't have people living in my house. So it ends up being, but again, they have administrative records, so they actually know who lives in my house.
How about the privacy? That's been a law has that always been a law, and what's the history?
It happened after World War II. Its Title 13 was codified in after World War II, where there was some misuse of census data for Japanese internment. And so that's one of those never again things. And sometimes people, after 9/11, somebody wanted to know where the Arab population lives. Well, lo and behold, you can get that from public use census data, down to the census tract.
Yep.
Where do people live? Where do the Puerto Ricans live?
Mm-hmm.
Where do the this or that? That's public use data. It just doesn't say who's living on that block, but it's that characteristic. That's different than to, and if there's only one Hispanic living on a block, it's not gonna.
Well, I mean, that's a great point of clarifying what data is already publicly available and can be seen in aggregate form,
Yes,
but
it's aggregate form, it's
with very
tables.
specific sort of geolocational applications. But I mean, I think this comes back to, talking about what's really at stake with the census. I think, we've heard a lot of, I think, tremendous points from County Executive Budish talking about the programmatic funding, and I think Michele's done a great job of reemphasizing a lot of, what those dollars mean. But in addition to that, I think we have to look at the very basis and core of our democracy, and going back to this point on redistricting and what that data is used for, how it's really the lifeblood of our government, how decisions are made, and really taking this as an opportunity to do some civic education, to talk about, if we're looking at this data and if there are problematic processes, in particular, Michele, thank you for bringing up prison gerrymandering. I think, when we look at that and we look at how people are being counted in parts of the state where they don't reside except for when they are in a correctional institution.
And they can't vote.
And they can't vote except for, I think, the state of Vermont.
Non-felons can vote.
Yeah,
Right.
after
And-
they get out,
No, non-felons can vote.
not when they're.
People in jails can vote, people in prisons cannot in the state of Ohio.
I've been to both the workhouse
Uh-huh.
and the county jail.
Yes.
Working for the Board of Elections.
Fantastic.
You could be on trial for a felony and
Mhm.
still vote.
Okay.
You can't be serving a sentence.
Right, it's if you're convicted of a felony and serving time in prison, you cannot vote.
So
Correct.
if you're in Marion County and you're being counted,
There.
you are not able to vote and give an opportunity if you're serving that sentence, is what it,
If they're on a misdemeanor,
Yeah.
you wouldn't
Or
be
you wouldn't be in
there
prison.
well.
if you were on a
Yeah.
misdemeanor.
But worse is that the places where prisons are pretty much across the whole United States, they tend to be in rural areas,
Mhm.
far away from where they came from.
Right.
Well, and I think there's also something to be clarified there with federal prisons, and also that's something where,
Yeah.
with federal prison populations, you could be from Ohio, but in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, but you're counted in Ohio for population counts for the
Good.
census. So I think that's a differentiation when we look at state
Ah.
prisons and people being in Marion County who are from Cleveland. That has a real impact on Cleveland.
Right.
But I think this also, again, connecting it back to, how our processes of counting and who counts and how we count them, right? I think it's worth, continuing to move forward in understanding, why the citizenship question was thrown out in conversation with this, right? This was thrown out because there was a very clear expose put forward about, what was the gentleman's name? Thomas Hoffeller.
Hoffeller.
Yeah, and seeing, through the New York Times, great reporting, and other sources, what was a very clear strategic plan for gerrymandering, and how, when you looked at that, the Supreme Court couldn't move forward with that case with good conscience.
That said, I think my cup is half full, probably more than it should be sometimes. I think that the idea that President Trump kept tossing this back and forth and all of the drama around the citizenship question, whether it was going to be on, whether it wasn't, what were we going to do as county leaders to be responsible for our citizens and our most vulnerable, to make sure that we were acting in good faith, but still wanting them to be counting? I really believe that all of that press brought out a big, large citizen group that was going to make this something that was going to be important to be counted, whether or not the question actually ended up there. So I believe all press is good press, and I have faith that that there's an opportunity for the activists, especially those in this room, are going to use that other opportunity to say, put it on, put it out, but we're going to be ready for you, and we're going to be ready to put in forth those efforts to make sure that those counts happen.
No, and I'm with you that, I look at all of these as organizing opportunities, but I also do think, there's still an ongoing court case with the state of Alabama.
Yes.
The Attorney General's moving this forward I think it was put forward by Congressman Morris Brooks Jr. to look at, for the state of Alabama's redistricting process to be led by only counts of citizens. And this is something that, that has tremendous implications for what the environment will be like going into the census in 2020. So I think it's something that we have to continue to monitor.
And there was a Supreme Court case in 2016 put forth by Texas, one better. Let's only count people who are voters. So it's 18 and over. So do you know what? The young population tends to not be as white, non-Hispanic as the older population. So you have it be voters, so it's citizens and 18 and over. That's puts us back to 1955.
So we've always counted everyone in the census, some not fully, but
Yes.
counted everyone. Is it clear in the law, or is it up to the states?
For
Okay, for
redistricting.
apportionment, to say Ohio has 19 or 18 seats, that's counting everyone. But once you get to the state and they determine how to divide up those 18 seats, is that up to the individual states?
Yes. Redistricting can be done based on something else.
So, and I think isn't that part of the reason behind some effort
Mm-hmm. Yep.
to get the citizenship or citizen count?
No, I think that's fundamentally was the logic behind that. And that's
So-
something, go ahead.
So go ahead, maybe California might be a good example, or Texas or something, explain how big that could be there.
It
If-
makes the size of the districts. Ohio doesn't matter very much. Your districts run the percentage. I just looked at it and I don't have it in front of me, but Ohio doesn't make a whole lot of difference if you just did the voting age population, citizens 18 and over. But a state like Texas, a state like California, it makes a big difference. It could be one district that's 40% of the population in that district would meet that requirement, and another district in the state is 75%. So that's the reason it was brought up in Texas, going, it's not fair. Our votes are being diluted. We're not getting as much representation. These people are being overrepresented. Even though children cost money, non-citizens are riding buses, non-citizens can be here legally, most of them are, and they're working, they've got green cards. Why can't they be represented by somebody? They just can't vote, but they can do a lot of other things, so.
Yep.
Did that pass?
What?
Did that pass in Texas?
Well, the Supreme Court, they got greedy because they said that this should be the way you have to redistrict. And the judgment was, it was a 6-3 decision saying the total population is perfectly good to use. And so they should have said, can we do this? But they were wanting to say, you have to do it. And they were greedy, but it will come back. So they'll be smarter the next time.
Now, we did mention earlier that census has taken place every time, but there was one time, was it 1930 or 40?
20.
1920, where they didn't use it for apportionment because there was a dispute about it being, was that the time, you'd probably know
So
better than me.
1920 was the year that they did the census, but they never reapportioned the population. And you think of what happened in 1920. First time that urban areas were bigger than, or urban population was bigger than rural population. What were the urban people? Bunch of foreigners. They were sort of not the, what the population had been. They were different. So all the kind of language that we have going on right now, and so they never redistricted. In 1929, they passed a law that basically said, we will always reapportion. So we have always reapportioned from that point on. But the 1920 census, if you go look at apportionment population, every single state is the same in 1910 and 1920. They just used the 1910 apportionment population. So it's a pretty, and actually one consequence that has to do with gerrymandering, they also then sort of took out the language that said congressional districts should be pretty much the same size. And so states stopped, let's say a state didn't gain a seat or lose a seat. The state of Tennessee did not redistrict for 70 years. So the rural areas got smaller and smaller. Detroit, Michigan, lots and lots of states. So Baker versus Carr is a famous Supreme Court case that had to do with, this is just a state matter, but the states weren't doing anything about it because who wants to give up their seat in Podunk County? They're never going to give it up. So finally the Supreme Court said you have to redistrict. So it wasn't reapportionment was the issue, but they were not redistricting within the states. So that was called malapportionment. And if you look in, Google engrams, it was a word that was used for about 15, 20 years and never used again.
Lisa, actually, I have a question for you. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm allowed. But when was the last time that we grew the number of seats in the U.S. House?
Okay, they used to, that was another thing, was a smart decision to just keep having the number of seats grow so that there was never a problem. I believe it stopped in 1910, except when Alaska and Hawaii came in, they each got a representative in the late 50s, and then in the 60 census, some state lost out because of those two, and I'm a Texan, and we were no longer the biggest state. Landmass-wise. But, so we've been at 435, except for very brief, it went to 437, but instantly back to 435.
Okay.
1929.
No, that was the apportionment,
House membership.
oh, the house size of the house?
So that
Okay.
was at 435, but a couple times we went like 436 or 437.
Well, it went to
and back down.
437 and then went back down.
And then Ohio, I believe, has been shrinking in terms of representatives since about 1970. So we lost 2 last time.
Yeah,
And the last time I looked at this, when the census state population estimates came out last December,
right.
I think using
Yeah,
their handy
yeah.
calculator they have
Yeah.
at University of Michigan, you can plug numbers in and see what happens. But I think if you took it on that day last year, Ohio wouldn't lose any seats. But if you kind of project forward, if the same type of population trends,
Right.
they would lose a seat.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you see? And how about the rest of the country? Is it going to be more in the west and south, or?
Yes, Texas, if you project it forward to 2020, should be getting, instead of 4 seats, they might only get 3. And Michigan is going to lose a seat. And that, again, if non-citizens or the undocumented population is, the Pew Hispanic has a count of state by state by state, how big is your undocumented, how big is the undocumented population? And it's an estimate, but if you leave out the undocumented population, it hurts California. It actually helps Ohio because you don't have as many foreign-born, you're below average on foreign-born, you're below average on, so that actually helps you, but it doesn't help Northern Ohio. And we want there to be a good count. Again, as citizens, you want the count to be good nationwide. So So, yes, it's going to the south and west. Alabama, that's one reason Mo Brooks has that. Alabama is projected to lose a seat if you project it forward to 2020. So, but if you didn't count the undocumented population, they would be okay.
And then within the state, it comes, like I was saying, in California's represented, they might get the same number of representatives, but if you don't do this,
Oh, yeah,
but then it'll be more rural and less urban.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if rural
Yeah.
and urban's the right thing
Yeah.
in California, but in some areas.
yeah, yeah.
How about the, somebody's asking probably the simplest question here after all this discussion is what can people do to help with the census other than fill out your own census?
Well, I think they should go to, as the county executive had mentioned earlier, is Cuyahoga County .us website on, the Cuyahoga County's website on the census. We have flyers available to help increase people to get jobs. We have a speakers bureau sign up if there's an organization that you would like a speaker from one of our subcommittee chairs to come out and speak, or somebody from the county to come and talk to a group of people. You can also talk to your friends and family about it. I mean, again, since it's nonpartisan, kind of, it's something that I think is okay to talk about at Thanksgiving without
Yeah.
having Uncle Charlie get mad and storm off.
Yeah.
I think it's also, one of the organizing things that I have worked at, have seen successfully with getting out the vote is making a plan of how do you plan to get to vote. And I remember them thinking that, you know, that's so far ahead, why would I think about it? But because you could do it and register to vote, and you can go in person, or you can go at the day of, or you can do, I think making a plan on how you and your family are gonna complete the census. If you are in some of the areas that are listed in this hard to count committee, and my community is Lakewood, Ohio, and they're also part of the hard to count, check in and talk to your friends at City Hall or at your, and see what the plan is for your specific area of how to make sure folks are counted. I think it's also important to share the impact of these dollars, so that if somebody is not necessarily wanting to complete the census, that you talk to them about the things that are impactful to them, things that they use.
And so people aren't scared that, I think a lot of people still think there's a long form out there, which is referred to the
It's not
American
like the
Community Survey.
FAFSA, it's simple.
But now it was the last census, the first one or two censuses ago, where they got rid of the long form? The last one, right, 2010?
2010 was the first year that we had just a short
So-
form census.
So
Yeah.
basically, we're just asking name, age,
Relation to head,
with your father,
race, Hispanic, age, sex, relation to head, and whether you rent or own a home.
So just some basic questions, about 9
Maybe they
questions
could
a
do like
person.
take a selfie with your census form and kind of put it on Instagram kind of thing,
Yeah,
you know?
that's legal compared. Yeah.
Right, you
Well, no,
know.
I do think, I mean, it's great to think about all these creative ways. I
Yeah,
think
we
we really
need
do
to
have to
have
be
those
creative.
stickers. I voted, I census,
Yeah.
Yep.
I count. There you
Count me
go.
in,
Oh, they have some.
count me in, 2020.
Oh, okay.
Let our panel catch your breath for a minute, since we have census people here. What hasn't been addressed to you, you'd like to mention here tonight? This time I'll remember to give the mic so you can hear.
And turn around and, so get on camera,
thank you.
get on camera.
Thank you, I appreciate the opportunity to fill in the blanks, and the panel has been awesome. And Lisa, you are a walking history book
Yeah.
of knowledge with the U.S. Census Bureau, and we
Yeah.
couldn't be more excited to be here tonight with you as well. But just a couple of things for, how the census affects all of us here in the room, for the majority of us. The timeline with the census is, as we said, the work has already started. And part of that work is right here with Nada and myself. We are partnership specialists, and there are, and the number you counted, or you referenced today with the scientific briefing, is 1,301. There are 1,301 of us across the country working at the county level. So Nada works right here in Cuyahoga County. I work just to the east in Lake Geauga and Ashtabula counties. And we work with the highest elected officials and businesses and organizations to help educate and create that awareness of what the census is and how census data matters, how that money comes right back into our communities. So it's really important to understand that, yes, there are 1,301, maybe you're the one, maybe I'm the one, I'm not so sure. And we still have a few hundred more to hire across the country. So I think that was the number that Lisa was referencing. In
Right.
addition to that, what Michele was noting was census takers. So we are still hiring hundreds, thousands actually, of positions across the country for census takers. Those are the enumerators that, should a household not respond, will come to the door, and no matter how I say it, it never sounds fun, but they're only there to collect responses. So they will come to the door, and that's only after the 4 touch points ahead of that. So I want to back up and tell you about that timeline. In early March, households across the country will receive the invitation to respond. And it's an invitation to respond online or by mail, preferably, because of course that keeps costs down and reduces taxpayer dollars to conduct the census. So you can go online in the middle of the night, you can pick up the phone in the wee hours of the morning, it doesn't matter. Self-response is the first and preferred way that we ask for folks to respond. About a week after that first invitation comes into your mailbox, you will get a reminder email, or I'm sorry, reminder mail. Hey, don't forget, fill out your census. There's also a third touch point shortly after that. So again, we talk about those checks and balances. If a household has not responded, you'll have yet another response. The fourth touch point will be a form in the mail. So that's the paper form where we're really reaching out to encourage folks for self-response. Again, you still can respond online, by phone, or now by your paper form. And then it's only after that point that an enumerator will come to the door. But again, we still have many hundreds of jobs across the country available to fill. And a really neat thing about those jobs, they're $18 per hour here in $18.50 here in Cuyahoga County. Per hour, part-time, flexible, part-time, paid training, weekly pay. We supply you with all of your equipment. I asked the amount because the dollars per hour varies per county. So in Lake Geauga and Ashtabula County, it's $16 per hour, so it's location weighted. But it's really a fantastic opportunity. Somebody had asked, what can I do to be involved, to get involved? That is one of the ways. You can work for the United States Census Bureau. Other ways are invite Nada or myself or any of our colleagues across Northeastern Ohio to come speak to your organization. If you serve on a board, if you work at a workplace, I have conducted briefings to staff to let them know. We would love to share this information with you and encourage everybody to respond to their census. Our goal at the Census Bureau for the 2020 decennial census is to count everybody once and only once and in the right place.
That's the
Exactly.
National Academy of Sciences book.
Yes,
Got that
and
title.
you know, we have special operations that will be conducted for group quarter counts, for folks who are in prison, who live in dorms, who stay at a shelter, how we count the homeless. You know, there's homeless, there's, hey, my brother lost his job and he's been sleeping on my couch the last 9 months. Well, technically he's homeless, yes. Then there's the homeless who stay in a shelter. Every night, that's where they lay their head, but during the day, they have nowhere to go.
Well, he's
They're
kind of
homeless as well.
in that
And then we
house.
have those who, and I know I experience this when I'm working with our organizations in Lake County, there are encampments in the Paynesville area. So we're working very closely with officials within the city of Paynesville and the other shelters and service organizations who provide food and clothing and shelter and daily living necessities to those folks who are the true homeless. And we meet those objectives with the same dignity and respect to collect responses. So it's a pretty massive undertaking, but we're very excited. The momentum is strong. And we just keep moving forward with the great partnerships within each of our counties. And again, you know, with all of you here, showing up here just shows us that, you know, you have questions. We're ready to address those questions and dispel any myths that may be out there. And we're all available to,
It's
yes.
pretty cool on the Census Bureau's, I was really impressed. They have a new website called rumors.com. It's not, they have something to dispel rumors because again, this sort of fake news era and somebody wanting to undermine the census, it's, if you just Google Fighting 2020 Census Rumors, they have questions, and it's like, do we count non-citizens? Yes, we do. And is our data safe? Are our answers safe? Yes, they are. And so that's the first time the Census Bureau has actually kind of put on some boxing gloves and actually have I was really going, wow, that's pretty neat.
We learned a lot since 2010, and one of the other things, you know, in addition to dispelling rumors that are out there, is just ensuring that everybody has a voice. It is the data derived from the census that controls our congressional boundaries. It is the data that controls our funding and how much is allocated back here into Cuyahoga County. So it's so important that everybody responds.
Question?
Yeah, there's a
Oh,
social-
good point. Nada just brought to my attention about filling out your census survey. So only the person in the household can fill out that survey. You can't fill out your neighbor's survey, nor if a census taker comes to your door, they will not be asking you, in addition to not asking you for your social security number or any money or political affiliation, but they will not ask you about your neighbor. They will only collect responses for the person who, you know, they've knocked on the door and the person that's answering the door. So great point.
I got a question.
Oh,
So how many are applying for work now?
I'm
Anyone?
sorry, I didn't see your hand back there.
I just wanted to say, for those that are interested in being a census taker, I represent Ohio News Jobs, Cleveland, Cuyahoga County. So if any individual would like to come out and apply for positions as being a census taker, we have computers available, free computers available, and we walk them through every step.
I do believe you are a subcommittee chairperson for the census. Thank you very much. Ida Ford back there, thank you.
So you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah,
Michele.
and again, we are trying to, one of the best organizing campaigns I have ever seen or been part of is the Obama 08 campaign. And trying to take that page out of that organizing book to make sure that we have folks who are already in the business of helping folks get jobs, making sure that we're working with people who already do this for a living, and taking out the political campaigning and just overlaying the idea of having the campaign structure that's in place so that you can understand that more. We love our friends at the census, but we're not going to rely on the state of Ohio, the city of Cleveland, or the U.S. Census Bureau to do this. We are going to do this as a county and make sure that we put in place those structures and organizing capacity for those experts to do this job well and put the message on the census over it. Because as the county executive said in his opening statement, or as you did, Rich, back in 2010, the prediction was right there that this was going to be a 2/3, 1/3, and that the minority party would now become the Democratic Party. I mean, this is not political, but it is to getting to that idea of understanding that this is the organizing that has to be done.
One thing in 2010, the Census Bureau director happened to be from the University of Michigan. We don't use but
We don't say that word Michigan
yeah,
here. because-
yeah. But he was. I said, you know what you ought to do? You ought to have daily. What is the response rate, or what's the mail back in Ohio versus Michigan, or by county, etc. And
I like
so
that.
that you could actually have
Absolutely.
two neighboring towns compete and say we're doing better, and that capacity, because it is now
motivating.
but it's so that I suspect will be available
That might
again
be
for
illegal.
2020, and that's a nice way to have some competition, and whether it's by county or these little suburban towns, places.
I think
I think we're
Cuyahoga's
gonna-
done the best.
We're gonna
Yeah.
come up with the best in the Midwest competition right now. I
Right,
think we're
right.
gonna start it.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
So after you make sure everything is counted, here's the question I have, because what I do, I end up talking, it was my job, I end up talking to a lot of people that are the data geeks
Yeah.
at the Weather Service,
Right.
the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Census Bureau. And my experience is once you get past that level of maybe where they're political appointees, people have been doing it for years, and they have a way to do it, and they do it the same way. And typically, they report things that way. But just in the news in the last day or two, Wilbur Ross, who people in Cleveland might remember
Oh.
from LTV, Steel here in Cleveland years ago, Commerce Secretary, at least according to news reports, he followed up on direction from the White House to talk to the National Weather Service about changing their statements on the hurricane. He's also in charge of the Census Bureau.
He's the Commerce
Do you-
Director, so.
Do you guys have concerns about that at all, or is that something we shouldn't be concerned about?
Why you gotta say that to me, Rich? Now I'm not gonna sleep tonight.
Well,
I haven't been sleeping well, so I know I'm with you on those concerns because I think that's real. I think it's understanding the environment that we're in and being honest with ourselves and being honest with our communities. I think right now we have assurances of how things are going to go forward. In particular, I mean, Commerce Secretary Ross was instrumental in moving forward the case for the citizenship question and provided testimony that was, going to have further inquiry from members of Congress because there were things there that didn't add up. And I think, again, we have clarity on what is going on with the Department of Commerce and the census right now. I think we have to continue to move forward on good faith, but we also have to be prepared and agile. We need to make sure that our communities have a clear line of communication to folks who can be explainers, and that we're continuing to grow that community of folks who are explainers. And that's where I think, again, the efforts of the county, the efforts of the city, again, even the folks at Cleveland Votes, doing trainings like that and getting more of the local navigators is what's going to get our community to a good place.
there was actually, Stephen Dillingham is the director of the Census Bureau, which this is another thing that hurt the Census Bureau. They didn't have a confirmed director until, for about a year and a half, which is terrible for 2020 planning. But he was asked, what is the Census Bureau going to give to the president? And it should just be total population counts for every state.
Yeah.
And he went and didn't answer. But by now, the official answer is it's going to be total population counts. But that was like, wow, is that gonna, you're gonna give them something different? Are we gonna, it should have been an easy answer to give. And then he said, I can't give an answer because there's litigation, the Alabama case. But it has finally come forth that it's going to be the total population count, meaning everybody, the human beings in each state. So.
And I think we're gonna have to count on good reporting from you, Rich, to make sure that as these things are counted, to make sure that the idea that post-count, the data geeks that are gonna be so important, and also, accurate and frequent reporting on this topic is going to be not just before, but after the count, to make sure that they are realistic and accurate.
The
Yeah.
timekeepers that want us to wrap up here at 8:30 because maybe they'll run out of film in the video. They don't film anymore. But, so in just a short amount of time here, maybe a wrap up from each of you.
Start with Lisa.
I'm going to give a shout out to Hansi Lo Wang of
Yes.
NPR.
Yes.
He is the best. And he didn't know anything about the census 2 years ago. But he tweets, I follow him mostly on Twitter, but he has very readable articles. So it's Hansi, Hansi, Lo Wang. And he is really, really good. And so you can actually sound like a census expert if you just read his articles. And that would be the best thing that somebody said, you work for the Census Bureau? Because, you just know so much. And you're just following him.
Well, Lisa, you gave away my secret because I get Twitter notifications from Hansi Lo Wang.
If we're interested in working
Yeah.
with you on this, who would we talk to?
So I'm in charge of all of the complete count committees, but we do have representation from Ida Ford from Ohio Means Jobs. We have Daniel Ortiz, Michael Barron, who invited us here today. He's part of our communication outreach. Basically, there's a website and or an email address that say, I'm interested, I want to be involved. Right now in the education phase, being part of that subcommittee, determining whether it's senior citizen outreach, whether it's faith-based initiatives, there's a way to get involved and continue to promote this material. I guess the best and easiest way would be to send an email to me and we will connect you. I'm Pomerantz at Cuyahoga'County.us. And either through me or Michael, or I think we have a few other subcommittee chairs here to kind of plug you in where it fits.
Well, thanks for, oh,
I'd like to add a shameless plug. The co-sponsor League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland is on the complete count committees for Cuyahoga County and for Cleveland. So if you are a League of Women Voters member, we would be delighted to have you join us in our efforts on the census.
And they have wonderful slides.
Yes.
I've been on a panel with them.
well, I appreciate everybody with the panel and the audience. And our unsung hero, we got all these sponsors at the forum tonight, but there's Michael Barron in the back. It doesn't happen without him. He's fully known him 6 times. He asked everybody to come here tonight, the whole panelists, so thanks to Michael again on that. And thanks for coming.
Thank you.